Let me get started and talk to you about something that kind of changed my life many years ago. And it really kind of framed a lot of my thinking, little did I know it, about love, marriage, fidelity, and family. When I was a kid in the 70s, there was this epic miniseries that came on television that pretty much captivated the nation. The year was 1977, and the television miniseries was called Roots, which was a best-selling book with the same name. Renowned author Alex Haley wrote the story after discovering that he was descendant of a African slave named Kunta Kinte. Well, the series started with a very dramatic scene of Kunta Kinte being captured in Africa. And I was a teenager at the time, and as a black kid, really for the first time, I got a real sense of what it must have felt like and been like to be a slave. And I really had never sort of reflected on that a whole lot, but they really did an excellent job of depicting a lot of what this could have been like, and it just captivated me as well. Well, anyway, Kunta Kinte was a very proud and determined man, and as a result, he tried to escape several times, and every time he was caught, and he was harshly punished. After one failed attempt, the slave catchers cut off part of his foot to make it more difficult for him to ever run again. He was nursed back to health by a slave woman named Belle, who was the plantation's cook. They fell in love and eventually jumped the broom, which was Mary, and given Kunta Kinte's tendency to run, Belle used her influence with the master to get her husband a job as the plantation owner's carriage driver. She thought that this would give him a sense of freedom, given his desire to be free. Well, one day, while Kunta Kinte was putting the horses away, he heard a drum beat that sounded very familiar to him. And he followed that beat, and he came across an older African slave, and it turns out that this man had lived in a tribe very close to Kunta Kinte's people. Well, this man told Kunta Kinte a story, and he said, in the not too distant future, you're going to hear this very same drum beat, because this is going to be a signal for an escape. So as you can imagine, Kunta Kinte, he's like extremely excited. And he rushes home to share this great news with Belle. He's like, I met this dude, he had a slamming beat, and I got to bring stuff, I got to flow with you now. Right? And he starts telling her, how this guy, we're gonna escape and all this kind of stuff. And she did not really share his excitement. In fact, she got very afraid. You see, her first husband had tried to escape, and they had caught him and killed him. And she just did not want to lose Kunta Kinte as well. And he continued to try to persuade her, but really to no avail. But then she did something that stopped him in his tracks. She took his hand, and she put it on her stomach so that he could feel the baby growing inside of her. And he got it. Kunta Kinte understood, and he promised not to escape. Well, when the baby was born, Kunta Kinte decided to dedicate his daughter in the same way that his father had done for him. So one night, he swallowed her up and took her out into the night air for this very special ceremony. But as he lifted her to the night sky, he was interrupted by a familiar sound. Drumbeats. Drumbeats. They were calling to him. So he quickly bundled up his little girl and ran towards home. Well, Belle heard the drum beats as well. And she panicked, dropped everything, and went to find her husband. She approached him quickly and said, the drums. You ain't going to run, is you? This is your home. Well, Kunta Kinte said defiantly, this is not my home. And Belle's legs buckled as she burst into tears. But then Kunta Kinte tenderly steadied his wife, pulled her close, and wrapped his arms around her and said, "But this is my child, and we are a family." And then they walked back into the home, and as the episode ends, you hear the voice of Kunta Kinte telling his daughter, whom he named Kizzy, which was the African word in his tongue of staying put, telling her the story of her people, telling her her history, because her history is linked to her destiny. Now, just consider what's happening here. You've got Kunta Kinte, a husband and a father, with no economic rights, no civil rights, no rights of any kind. But he has one power that no master's whip could take away. He had the power to stay put, despite the obstacles, the risks, the challenges, and anything else that was done to him. He was going to do what he needed to do to provide for and protect his family. And as you see, without the Kizzy of Kunta Kinte, there would be no future renowned author Alex Haley. Kunta Kinte resisted the drum beats that beckoned him. You know, he marched to a different drum beat, a beat whose cadence was love, marriage, fidelity, and family. Well, little did I know at that time as a teenage boy that this story would have so much personal relevance for me, because when I was a 19-year-old sophomore here at Princeton, I had a drum beat moment of my own when I got a call from my girlfriend who told me that she was pregnant. You see, I'd grown up without a father, and there wasn't much social pressure on me to step up to the responsibilities that my actions had created. In many ways, I had been listening to the prevailing culture's syncopation. Its beat was calling to me to be free. But by God's grace, I didn't run. I chose to Kizzy and be a husband to my wife and a father to my child. And I've remained so for 30 years. Now, as you know, my talk today, I picked the title, First Comes Love, Then Comes What? You know, like the little children's rhyme kids inflict on each other on playgrounds when two young playground lovers meet. First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes insert names of embarrassed boy and girl, and the baby carriage. This tune, interestingly, it had a drum beat, one that we don't hear increasingly today in our culture. It's been replaced. So what I want to talk to you today about is this notion of cultural drum beats. Cultural drum beats. And these are the beats that are all around you. These are beats that you have to make a decision as to whether you're going to follow them or not. And I'm going to talk about 6 beats that will impact your decisions around love, marriage, family, and fidelity. Now, I know that I'm the only thing that's standing between you, certainly after lunch, and your head hitting the seat in front of you. Therefore, participation. And here's the way this is going to work. I have 6 drum beats. To your right or to your left, you have a little wooden armrest. Oh, you can put that thing up too. That's good. I like that. Innovation. Love it. And here's what I need you to do. As I start with each drum beat, I need to hear a drum beat for you. I have low self-esteem, so I need audience participation in order to keep me going. All right? So, let us get going with the first drum beat together. Oh my gosh. When I gave this at Penn, I mean, they just were slamming. Let's try that again. There you go. Drum beat. Drum beat number 1. Here's the first drum beat. The belief that variety leads to and helps fidelity. Now, I recently had an interesting conversation with a young woman about whether it was a good thing or if it was a societal beneficial thing for teens and for unmarried people to have sex. And she argued very passionately that it was. She said that non-marital sexual activity was very good and, in fact, a necessary thing. Why? Well, this type of sexual exploration prepares one for future relationships and even marriage. You know, practice makes perfect. After all, folks who kind of do this kind of thing, they will know their wants and needs sexually. Now, this is an interesting and widely accepted drumbeat today. I won't even talk about the STI issues and the risk, which are significant. But I want you to think about this, because this perspective is really based on some faulty logic. You see, unmarried sex is all about variety, the number of partners and experiences. But marriage and married sex is all about fidelity. So how can training your sexual response in exactly the opposite way prepare you to respond in a different way? I mean, just think about that for a second. Baseball season just ended, so let me use a baseball analogy. If you want to throw a better curveball, you're not going to be able to do it by practicing sliders. You got to throw curveballs. You got to practice throwing curveballs, and you got to get really, really good at throwing curveballs. And in this case, the chastity muscle in singleness is the same muscle that's needed for fidelity in marriage. If you train your sexual response to want not just more, but also more and different, it's illogical to expect it to be satisfied with more and the same. So it's not surprising within marriage that there can be risk, and that's exactly what the research shows. The CDC recently had produced some data called the National Survey for Family Growth, and it looked at the number of non-marital sexual partners versus the percentage of intact marriages after 5 years. And they found that there was an inverse relationship between these two data points. In other words, the more sexual partners, the less likely for one to remain married. For example, in a situation where there were no non-marital sexual partners, 80% of these couples remained married. However, with 5 partners, that number dropped down to 30%, and with 21 plus partners, it dropped down to 20%. So if you want to increase your likelihood of having a happy marriage, practicing with a lot of folks does not lead to a more perfect union. Drumbeat number 2. There you go. You guys are getting the habit of it. There is no link. There's no problem delinking marriage from motherhood and fatherhood. Now, given my background and the fact that today 1 out of 3 kids are growing up in homes absent their fathers, 2 out of 3 in the African American community, let me just focus on the fatherhood aspect. There are reams and reams of social science data that correlate the risk and the low in the academic performance area, teen pregnancy, poverty, interaction with the criminal justice system, with the presence or absence of involved, responsible, and committed fathers. And that's even after you control for race and economics. On average, kids who are growing up in father-absent homes are 2 to 3 times more likely to be at risk than kids who are growing up in these same homes with their 2 biological married parents. Also, dads who don't live with their children have a very difficult time staying involved. There have been a number of studies on this, and I'll just cite one that looked at and surveyed 1,535 children and revealed that only 4 out of 10 reported in-person, phone, or letter contact with a non-resident father once a month. 3 out of 10 had such contact only several times a year, and 3 out of 10 reported no contact at all from their fathers over the past year. So when you have fathers that are absent out of the home, they tend to be disconnected. Now, I'm not a researcher or a social science guy. I'm a guy with an MBA, So I try to look at these things in a sort of a practical way. It's kind of the way I kind of view the world. So let me give you an illustration that kind of helps unpack that. Since we're at Princeton, I called it the Theory of Relationtivity, which is participation equals motivation plus location, or P equals M plus L. I'm expecting a Nobel Prize at some point for this mathematical discovery. And this is how I tend to talk to people about this issue. Now, there's almost sort of, almost like a universal understanding, or at least agreement, that we want fathers to be participating in the lives of their children. In other words, that we're just not looking for fathers to be sperm donors with wallets. I mean, that's not really what we're looking for, as attractive as that may sound to some. Most people expect something more than that, right? That we want fathers to be engaged in some level. There may be an argument of what that means or what it looked like, but by and large, we expect more out of men when they father children than that. And that's pretty universal, I would say. Across the right, the left, conservative, I think you find that. So the question is, well, how do we get more participation? Well, you have these two variables called motivation and location. Now let me start with motivation. We did a lot of work at National Fatherhood Initiative, and one of the things that we did was we did a national survey called Pops Culture. And this survey was actually done by University of Texas, and it was a national sample, and we asked dads a bunch of different questions about their attitudes around fathering. And if you want to get that, you can go to National Fatherhood Initiative's website, go under research, and you can download it for free. Really great survey. In any case, so we did this survey, and we asked dads a bunch of different questions, and one of the questions that we asked them was, to what degree do you feel that you were prepared to be a father when you first became one? And what we found was that nearly half the fathers that we surveyed said that they weren't prepared. And I've been told that the other half were lying. That was, right? So nearly half the fathers surveyed said they weren't prepared. And that's not really shocking, because if you think about it, we don't do very much to teach men to be fathers. We do almost nothing. Nowhere near what we do to prepare girls and women to be mothers. We really don't. And so this survey data wasn't really shocking to us. But there were some other pieces that were. One of them was we asked the question, to what degree do you feel that you're replaceable by mom or some other guy? And what we found was that over half the fathers that we surveyed said that they were replaceable by mom or some other guy. Let's think about that. These were fathers in the home, these were fathers who had children under the age of 18. Some in the home, some non-resident. But over half of these guys said that they were replaceable. Just think about that for a second. That's just amazing. It's remarkable. And interestingly, we did a similar survey of moms called Mama Says, a national survey of moms' attitudes about dads. And a higher percentage of the moms said that they were replaceable by them or some other guy. That's a whole other conversation, a whole other thing to go on there. But you see what we're talking about. You've got this culture that's saying, you're replaceable, and guys are drinking the Kool-Aid and believing it. In any case, so if you have a high level of father absence, if a guy thinks he's replaceable, it doesn't surprise you, does it? Now, here's what I kind of think about this. Let's say I'm on a plane, and we're flying away at 30,000 feet, and I'm doing my work on my laptop, and the flight attendant comes up to me and says, listen, we need you to fly the plane. And I'm like, okay. She says, yeah, the two pilots had bad cheesecake at the last stop, and they're passed out in the cockpit. We need you to fly the plane. I'm a guy. I'm like, sure. How hard can it be, right? It's like a car, just higher. So, of course, I get up. I head down the aisle, pop open the door to the cockpit, and there they are, passed out. Dials flying, everything's there. I'm just about to step in, and someone taps me on the shoulder and says, listen, is it okay if I replace you? And I step and I look back, and I'm like, the person says, listen, I'm a pilot. I'm rated on this actual plane. I think I know how to handle this. I'm a guy, but I'm not stupid. I say, sure, absolutely. He or she steps in and lands the plane. Now, if you think about what just happened there, right? What just happened? The situation was exactly the same for both of us. Flashing lights, dials, all that stuff was exactly the same. The difference was what? Skills. See, skills lead to confidence, and confidence leads to motivation. I don't play golf because I stink at it. But I'm telling you, if I was to spend 6-8 months with one of the top golfers in the world and we were to play every day, I'd come back, I'd be a maniac person around golf, right? You couldn't keep me off the course. And so that motivation piece is really tied to skills. So as we train men to be better fathers, as we train boys to be better fathers, develop those skills to be the kinds of fathers that they need to be, guess what? Their motivation goes up and their sense of being replaceable goes down. And that leads us to location. Because if you have a father who's highly motivated, but he's not in the location, you're not actually going to get more participation, are you? So it's location as well. And location is much like real estate. Location, location, location. So we need this father in the proximity of his kids, right? Well, how close? Should he be in the same country? Is that a good idea? Okay, let's get him in the same country. Okay, same state? Okay, fine. Same city? Okay, let's give him the same city. Same neighborhood? Going once, going, same neighborhood. Same street. If we can work that out, if we can make it happen that he's on the same street with his kid, the likelihood that let's get that done. What about the same house? And I have these conversations with you all the time. Well, if we could make that happen, get him in the same house, doggone it. Now that's an idea. It's okay. Great. Let's work on that. I said, well, who's probably going to be in that house? The kid. Yes. And who else? The mother. Oh, okay. So the mother's going to be there. The kid's going to be there. What should the relationship between the mother and the father be? Should they like each other? I mean, should they? Well, sure. If we can get them to like each other, that would be fantastic. Great. Well, how much? Well, a lot. Okay. Let's try to get them to like each other a lot. Okay. Should they maybe love each other? Well, doggone it, if we could get that done, let's have them love each other. Well, how long should they love each other? Well, as long as possible. Well, forever? Yes. Okay, doggone it, forever. Okay. So is there any institution that's designed to get fathers and mothers in the house with their children, loving each other forever? And what's it called? Marriage. Right? It's called marriage. This isn't a right thing or a left thing or a political thing or a conservative thing. It's just practical. Because if you have fathers that are highly skilled and they're not in proximity to your kids, you're not going to get participation. And that's how I get to marriage. That's how you get there. It's just practical. It's just science, and therefore I will get a Nobel Prize for that. There you go. Okay. The next drumbeat. It's that covenant marriage is outdated and passé. Now, I recently read a book by Tim Keller. Some of you guys may be familiar with him, called The Meaning of Marriage. I highly recommend this book, whether you're going to get married or not going to get married. It's just amazing. I can say it's the best book I've ever read on the topic. In any case, Keller talks about the difference between covenant marriage and something that he calls consumer marriage. And here's what he writes. Sociologists argue that in contemporary Western society, the marketplace has become so dominant that the consumer model increasingly characterizes most relationships that historically were covenantal, including marriage. Today, we stay connected to people only as long as they are meeting some particular needs at an acceptable cost. When we cease to profit, that is, when the relationship appears to require more love and affirmation from us than we're getting back, then we cut our losses. Now that makes a lot of sense to me. Because just think about your attitude when you go shopping. It's transactional. I mean, you don't walk into your local Taco Bell with the notion of, what can I do today to really make the day special for that person behind the counter? How can I affirm them in that role and make them feel really, really good about it? I mean, how can I do that? I'm going to make their day today. I mean, is that what you do when you walk in to a restaurant or? No. Is that expected of you? Mm-mm. Why? It's consumer. It's transactional. You want what you want as cheap as possible, as quickly as possible, and if you don't get it, you want to see the manager. And in the world of marriage, the manager is the divorce lawyer. That's the way it works. And I just thought that's pretty interesting because this notion of a consumer marriage really follows very naturally to the first drumbeat that I mentioned, which is about non-marital sex. Because if sex is transactional, and dating, if it happens, also becomes transactional, and marriage, if it happens, become transactional. So consumer marriage Makes a lot of sense. See, because covenant marriage and consumer marriage are very, very different. One is about what you get. The other is about what you give. One is about what's owed or expected, and the other is about submission and sacrifice. You see, covenant marriage, as Keller says, unites feelings and duty and unites passion and promise. Feelings and duty, passion and promise. And if you think about the way that if you're watching one of these shows on television or whatever, I watched a little bit of Hollywood Brides yesterday. That was really interesting for me. It was a slow day, but that was just fascinating to me because they're in this shop getting this dress and the whole deal, and I just thought to myself, consumer marriage. That's the whole conversation there. Consumer. Feelings, passion. No discussion about duty and promise. You have to balance those things if you're going to have a good marriage. Drumbeat, number 4. Cohabiting is just as good as marriage. Plus, with the high divorce rate, it's the best way to test drive before you buy. Now, this is a pretty loud and especially compelling drumbeat, especially in light of the tremendous increase that we've seen in the number of folks who are cohabiting. On the surface, it sounds like it makes a lot of sense. I mean, this notion of try before you buy. But again, there's a logical flaw here. Since we've been talking about this sort of consumer stuff, let's continue in that vein. Okay, people think about cohabiting. It's like going into a store to buy a pair of jeans. How many of you have ever done that? Bought a pair of jeans? There you go. There you go. Okay, most of you have done that. The rest of you see me afterwards. I can help you with that, right? So you go to buy a pair of jeans, right? And what do? Get in the store, you find the jeans, you walk in, you try them on, right? You check all that out because how they look in the back is what really matters the most. Everyone knows that because that's what you see all the time. And it's all about you seeing that all the time. In any case, I digress. But right, so you're by yourself and you're looking at and you're seeing how they fit and how do they look and everything. And you think, they look pretty good, I think, but my friends aren't here. I'm not really sure. But you know what? I'm going to buy them anyway because I know this store's got a return policy. And as long as I keep the receipt, I'll be able to return them. So you decide to buy them. And you decide, I'm going to wear them to this party tonight and test them out. Now, I'm not going to tell everyone that these are not my jeans. I'm going to act as if they are, even though they're not. Right? But here's the thing. Since you aren't quite sure whether you want to keep the jeans, you're going to be pretty careful at the party. Okay, absolutely. That was interesting. Right? You don't want to get anything on them. Right? You don't want to get in. You love to dance, but when you dance, you sweat a lot. And you're like, well, I don't really want to sweat, and I don't want to get anything on them. The bottom line, when you're wearing those jeans, you're not really your true self. You're not really your true self. And the fact of the matter is, when you ask people about them, you're not really getting the right feedback because you're not being your true self. Right? It's interesting. So when the party's over, you're really not quite sure. Because you didn't really do in those jeans what you normally do. Because if you did what you normally do, you wouldn't be able to return them. That's cohabiting. And herein lies the conundrum. You see, the secret sauce in a good marriage is covenant commitment. And you can't sample a covenant commitment. You're either in one or you're not in one. It's kind of like being a little bit pregnant. I have some experience with that. You're either pregnant or you're not. There's this world of absolutes. See, people who are married, they trade in the world of absolutes. They make a public declaration, a binding declaration. They seek to integrate their lives, both their living and their being, emotionally, physically and spiritually. They seek intimacy. But here's the catch. There is no intimacy without vulnerability. And think about that. If someone's going to give you a hug, what do you have to do to get a hug? You got to open yourself up. All that vital stuff, right? It's all open if you're going to get a hug. There's no intimacy without vulnerability. And that's why if you're going into a public restroom, you don't drop your pants until you know that the door can lock. Just let that settle in there for a little bit. Right? Right? You're vulnerable, it's intimate, but I'm not going to do that unless I know I'm in a covenant commitment with this stall. You ever had that happen to you before? Come on, be honest. You've engaged, door opens, right? That's cohabiting. You're not supposed to see me like that. By the way, for those of you who are not married, that's when you know you're married. When you can engage in a conversation with your spouse and they're engaged in a conversation with something else. That's when you know, no, this isn't cohabiting, this is marriage. See, because marriage is it's kind of a risky love. It's a risky love in a way that cohabitation is not. But also, marriage has social, emotional, financial rewards that cohabitation does not. Within marriage, you're all in, and it would be crazy for you to be all in cohabitation when you know that the other person could decide to leave. You hold back. You don't sweat in the jeans, right? You don't sweat in the jeans. And when you start to look at cohabitation from the perspective of kids, the data is very, very troubling. There was one survey that found that 59% of women cohabited with a partner at least once, compared to 33% who married before the age of 24. And only 1 in 5 cohabiting relationships ended marriage. 50% of unmarried women who give birth are cohabiting with the father. And there's been an increase of that over the years. And about 50%, half the children born to cohabiting parents experience separation or divorce by age 9 versus about 20% who have married parents. It's not a test place for relationships, and it's certainly not a test place for children. And that's the reason why it's such a problem. Drumbeat number 5. Okay. Drumbeat number 5. We should allow the behavior of individuals to determine the value of high ideas and institutions. Jefferson penned the words, "We hold these truths self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with," and you know the rest of that. And it's interesting to me that at the time that he penned these words, he and the other signers held slaves. That's interesting for me. Jefferson didn't allow the low behavior of individuals to stop him from asserting a high idea. Now, it's interesting. Some folks say, well, he said all men and he meant white men. Well, frankly, he could have written white men. And nobody would have said, hey, Tom, what are you doing there? So I actually think it was divine that he wrote all men. Because I think there's something that's written on the hearts and souls of men, that the notion of owning another person and treating them like chattel is just wrong. You just know it. You just know it. And I think that Jefferson had a moment of moral clarity, and he wrote that word straight from his heart right onto the paper. And that was really, really important. In Memphis, in February of 1968, 1,300 black sanitation workers marched to demand human rights and to be treated with dignity. They silently carried signs. And the signs simply read, "I am a man." Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King eventually came to Memphis to support the strikers and was subsequently assassinated. Now just think about that for a second. Hundreds of years later, can you imagine if Thomas Jefferson had said, you know what, all white men are created equal? See, the whole civil rights movement, all the work that King and others did, they all pointed to that high idea. That high idea. And these sanitation workers were able to point to that high idea. See, because you don't let the behavior of individuals dictate the value of a high idea. Now, I hear people all the time that say marriage doesn't matter, and it's often because marriage didn't work for them or didn't work for their parents. But the value of an institution, again, should not be judged solely based on the failure of us to live up to it. I'm a Christian. The gospel challenges me to love my enemies and forgive those who do me wrong. Should I stop trying because I failed to do so or because others have failed to do so? See, when we stop seeking high ideas, we're invariably going to settle for low ideas. But we're going to expect the same rewards as if we were pursuing high ideas. But that's not the way life works. High ideas give high rewards. Low ideas give low rewards. Right? And you know, I saw this firsthand a few years ago when I was in Washington. I came to Washington, as I say, I'm a business guy, and you know, I'm not really a pretty political guy or all that kind of stuff. And I got to Washington, and you get into all this politics and all this kind of stuff. And I started to hear people talk about, well, you know, marriage, we don't need to talk about that. We just want to make sure that people have healthy relationships. That's really what we want to talk about, just healthy relationships. And it was the notion that friends with benefits are no different than friends with wedding rings. But if you ask folks to define what exactly is a healthy relationship, you could hear the crickets chirp. So I wrote an article in the Washington Post several months ago, which some of you may have read. I think it was on the list that they gave to you. You probably didn't read it, but you know, hey, whatever. It was just my blood, sweat, and tears, and just took me all that time to write it. It's not a problem. Hey, it's okay. It's okay. It's not a problem. I'll wait till you write something. You want me to read it. Anyway, again, I digress. So I wrote this article, and what I said basically in this article is that it's time for us to have a national DTR. Who knows what a DTR is? What is a DTR? Defined the relationship. And so what I did was I wrote these 20 questions that couples need to ask and answer. And here's the crazy thing. Everyone asks and answers these questions when you're in a relationship. You do. The problem is you just don't share it with the other person. You just don't. You don't share it. So I listed a bunch of these things so people could understand the distinction between a healthy relationship and a healthy marriage. So one of the questions was, should we be monogamous? Marriage? Yes. Healthy relationship? If I don't get caught. Maybe, yes, no, maybe, so, well, it depends how good you, I don't know. How do we define faithfulness anyway in a relationship? What does that mean exactly? What does that mean for you? What does it mean for me? Should we think of this as a long term? And what do we mean by long term? Should we live together? Should we buy property together? What obligations do I have if you get sick or lose your job, or I get sick and I lose my job? Should I pay for your education? Should I delay my career so that you can move forward? What sacrifices you see? That's only 8. And it's interesting when you look at that list and you go marriage versus healthy relationship. With marriage, the answers are already checked off for you, right? Because you're in a covenant relationship. Society checks those off. See, when you're in a marriage relationship, there are expectations, standards, and absolutes that are very, very public. Right? That's why people wear these things. It's funny. I'll give you just a quick story. I have a wife. She is gorgeous. She is. She's a cute thing. She's 50 and she's still fine, all right? I'm just saying. Is this on tape? Good. Hi, honey. All right. Love you. Anyway. I do. I love that woman. Quick story. Another quick story. You know, I told you that she got pregnant here on campus, and if I catch the guy who did it, I will. No, I'm just kidding. But was that on? That wasn't on tape, was it? Oops, it's also on tape. Editing is for that part. All right, he's good. Anyway, so I had like a moment yesterday. I caught the bus from the Dinky, or from Princeton Junction to thing, and as I was walking up that walkway, I came across the spot where I actually met my wife. I was just like, wow, I had no idea, you know? And so here's what happened, because I know you guys want to know, right? You got time here? Watch it. All right. So here's what happened. I used to play football when I was at Princeton, and we were poor back then, and you know, and so we had training table, and I think we ate it. Where's that? It's at Commons. So that's where the training table was for the football team. And it was raining that day, and we didn't have raincoats. So what we would normally do is that we would take plastic bags, garbage bags, and we would fashion raincoats, hats, gears, all of it. Tastefully done, of course. And we would kind of head home. So training table, same thing happened. Me and a couple of my buddies, we're heading back to Princeton Inn, which is called something else now. Was it Forbes College or something, right? Used to be called PIC back then. And so we're heading down, you know, the way that you go to Walmart, you know, that way. And I see this woman. I'd seen her in the cafeteria several times and kind of said a few things, but never really engaged. And I saw her, and she was walking by herself. And so I let my buddies kind of get ahead and pass her, and I walked up right next to her. And I said these words, and dudes, this works. I said, "What's a nice girl like you doing out on a night like this?" Hey, it works when you're wearing a trash bag. It's all in the presentation. Anyway, so yeah, true story. And so I walked her back to PIC, and then we started hanging out and stuff like that, and we've been married over 30 years, but that was the moment, that was the spot, and I had no idea. It's just amazing to me that at that moment, I would be walking with this woman, rain or shine, for the next 30 years. That's amazing, isn't it? Hand claps all around. Okay, back to my script. Okay, so anyway, as we were talking about, cohabiting, as you know, it's unpredictable, flexible, and relative. And that's why those types of relationships are not ideal for kids, because they need stability, structure, right? They do. Last drum beat. Culture doesn't really matter when it comes to marriage. And it's easy to get the opposite of what you model. Many years ago, I came across this quote I liked so much that I decided to make it part of my signature line in my email. And it reads, "I am the art in your art houses, the ideas in your institutions, the laws in your land, the messages in your movies, the thoughts of your teachers, the values your kids value. I affect you. Do you affect me?" Culture. Let that settle in. Culture. In my former job, I used to spend quite a bit of time talking to single mothers because of the work that I did around fatherhood. And one of the questions that I would ask them was what kind of fathers their sons would become. What kind of father their son would become. And it's interesting because invariably, without missing a beat, they would quickly respond, "A good one." And then I would ask, "Well, what kind of dad did your son have?" And too often they respond, "Not a good one." So I would say, "That's interesting." Because what's been modeled for your son is the opposite of what you expect him to be. You see, it's difficult to be what you don't see. Not impossible, but it's difficult to be what you don't see. Now, I work for all these companies, after graduating from Princeton, IBM, Goldman Sachs, Pepsi, places like that. And there aren't a lot of folk like me, like that running around in there. I mean, black folk, not folks in trash bags, but black folks. Running around. So whenever there'd be some inner city kid, whatever, they would always bring him over to guess who? Me. Why is that? Why would they do that? They'd say, look, there's a black guy doing this thing. You can be that. They're casting a vision. So why would we think that when it comes to families, that kind of stuff, all that like logical stuff that we know just breaks down, right? So me not seeing a father loving my mother matters? I mean, you think about that. We modeling, we do that all the time. You do it here. Hey, he's the top rocket scientist, blah, blah, blah. Spend some time with him. I need him as my research person, my thesis advisor, right? So why, when it comes to families and relationships, will we not do the same thing? And the irony here is that the better of a single mom she is, the more she's modeling for her son that he doesn't need to be there. Isn't that interesting? And by the way, it just doesn't work for sons. It also works for daughters. The better of a single mother she is, the more she's modeling that I don't need a man. I can do bad all by myself. Right? I mean, just think about that. But here's the thing. I have never met a single mother yet who said to me, listen, my hope and my dream for my daughter is that she will be a single mother just like me. That's my hope and my dream. In fact, every shiftless guy, I introduce him to her in hopes he will get her pregnant and leave her. I have never had that conversation. See, most women who are single mothers by chance, not by choice. That wasn't their hope and their dream. You guys ever heard that song from Les Miserables, I Dream a Dream? You ever heard that song? Read the words. Read the words. If you read the words, what is she dreaming about? She talks about the tigers coming and what happened to her dream. It made me cry. I heard that song. It's amazing. I dream a dream. See, I think that's what they dream that dream. It's not a good pickup line. Guy says, listen, by the way, I'm going to get you pregnant and I'm going to leave you. Just so you know, let's get busy. You don't have you want to believe that he's the right guy that will do the right thing. But the problem is nobody talks about what the right thing actually is. Because everybody has their script and they don't share it. I dream a dream. That's not her hope and her dream. But if you want something to be different, then you're going to have to do different. You're going to have to model differently. Or you won't get differently. And here's the thing. You can't model presence. See, I grew up with a single mom. Hey, I understand that. Don't get me wrong. I understand that particular situation. I understand firsthand what it takes to survive in that environment. And I got the Prince and the whole deal. I got that. I get it. So I'm there. But the problem now in our culture is that we're moving from a place of supporting single motherhood to celebrating single motherhood. Not from support to celebration. And you celebrate what you want more of. I celebrate anniversaries because I want one next year. I celebrate birthdays because you want more of those as well. Earlier this year, New York Times did a troubling story about the fact that the unmarried households are increasingly becoming the norm. They produced a number of compelling charts that really told the story about this. And what they basically did was they looked at births outside of wedlock based on educational attainment. Okay, and here's just a couple of things that they found. So they looked at unmarried households, or unmarried births rather, based on the educational level of women. And they looked at less than high school or GED, some college or associate degree, and a bachelor's degree or more. And they looked at this for black women, Hispanic women, and for white women. And there's some interesting data points in here that are very compelling. Well, first off, I mean, women, black women, for example, who have less than a high school degree, from 1990 to 2009, 82% of those women births out of wedlock, right? 82%. And it went from 82 to 88, right? 82 to 88. You can check this out on New York Times. It's a really compelling survey. But the most troubling part, frankly, and from a demographic perspective, is that when you look at white women with some college and associate degree, it went from 10% in 1990 to 30% in 2009. That's huge. That is huge. Huge. And the other thing I thought really interesting that folks didn't talk about too much was that when you looked at black women, in 1990, 23%, and in 2009, 32%. So black women with college degrees or more are tracking very similarly, have a little higher than white women that have some college and advanced degrees. So you ask the question, well, gosh, black women with college degrees, why would they be having children out of wedlock? I thought the whole deal was we just need to get people educated. Right? Because if you look at white women in the same demographic, it went from 3 to 6. Odds are you folks in here aren't going to be the ones having the children out of wedlock. These are the bachelor's degrees and above. So why would it be 5 times more likely for a black woman to have a child out of wedlock than a white woman? Think about that. It's culture. It's culture. You say, oh, marriageability. Yes, you're right. Marriageability. The number of black men that are eligible or available. But why would you have a child with him if you can't marry him? Because there's been a delinking in my community from marriage and fatherhood and motherhood. Those are 2 very, very separate things. And it's been delinked over years. That's why 2 out of 3 black kids grow up in homes absent their fathers. Culture. It matters. It has an impact. And the thing about it is that it's spreading this perspective. This drumbeat is spreading. Today, 25 million kids are growing up in homes absent their fathers, 64%, nearly 7% in the black community, 36% in the Hispanic community. In 1964, that number was 6.8% of births to single mothers. 6.8%. This is a tsunami because the research shows, and it tells us, that low-income children are more likely to come from father-absent homes. 5 to 6 times more likely. 5 times more likely to come from father-absent homes. They're more likely to be poor. And when you look at it in terms of single mother homes, 31% of those households, 31.6% of all those households are poor, compared to just 6.2% of married couple households live in poverty. There was a Brookings study that was done in 2009. It's an interesting one as well. And they talked about 3 things. They basically talked about 3 things that are the keys to not being poor, not being in poverty: pursuing work, graduating from high school, and waiting to have children until you're married. You do all those 3 things, you have a 2% chance of living in poverty, and a 74% chance of being in the middle income, as defined by a family income of $50,000 or more. It's the data. Now let me just close with a little personal story, because I haven't told you any personal stories thus far. So I should probably close with one. One of my nieces, I had a conversation with one of my nieces recently. She's mid-20s, and it was an interesting conversation because she said to me, one of the reasons that she likes to hang out with my wife and I is she really knows very few people that are married, and certainly that have been married as long as we have. She says, I just don't know any people like that. And I want that for myself. But I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to get there. I don't understand it. I don't know how to get there. And it just broke my heart. Her father hasn't been in her life since she was 6, She hasn't spoken to him in years. She hasn't seen marriages. Most of the marriages in my family have broken up. Her parents, cousins. It was a sad, sad commentary for me to hear her talk about her hope and her dream for this. And it was interesting because, there are drum beats that are happening for her. She's hearing these drum beats in the culture. And the fact of the matter is that she's been to more baby showers than wedding showers. See, when your baby shower, wedding shower ratio is out of whack, right? That's a problem. And I know from talking to her and from her heart that she wants to follow a different drummer. She wants a different drum beat. She wants the kind of drum beat that we've been talking about, one that's focused on love, marriage, fidelity, and family. And that really is a decision that that's before all of us. It's sort of like you have these two decisions. The culture is a broader, which is a collective of all of us in some way, shape, or form. We have to decide which drum beats to signal and which drum beats to accept. And as individuals, we have to decide which drum beats to play and which drum beats to pursue. And certainly my hope for each and every one of you is that you will choose the right ones, to listen to the right ones, to play the right ones, really because there's a lot at stake. I mean, the health of our nation and the well-being of our children really depends on that. So thanks for the drum beats. Thanks for listening to me.
Jonathan Pike from Broom University. I was really fascinated with your idea of skills leads to confidence and confidence to motivation and fatherhood. And I wanted to talk about institutions and what institutions lead to those skills. One institution that came to my mind was the Boy Scouts, and I wondered what other institutions are there, since the Boy Scouts seem to be under attack constantly, to teach young men these skills if we get rid of them. I mean, I'm sure there's youth groups and other things, but what have you seen that we can really change this?
Babysitting. And more babysitting. I mean, what makes you a father? The fact that you have kids. That's what makes you a father. So, just think about it. Like, okay, if I want to be a receiver, what I need to do, I guess I need to catch some footballs. So then I go where places where footballs are and I have people throw them to me. So I'm going to be a father. I'm just a practical guy, right? So I'm a father. Okay, what makes me a father is kids. Well, I should probably spend some time caring for kids. Small ones, large ones, big ones, right? That's what I should do. I go to church. There's a youth group. There's a children's church. Maybe I should volunteer in the nursery. Maybe if we have small children in my family, instead of letting my sister take the role, which happens so often in families, no, Mom, I'm going to care for the kids. Have more children so I can care for them. I'm just saying, it's practice for me. I'm just a practical guy. This stuff is really not all that, it's just not that complicated. It really is just, like, you're smart people. It's just about being intentional. So it's the same thing. When is it too early to start thinking about being a father? Never. Becoming one, yes, but developing the skills that you need in order to be a father? Never. Good fathers do three things. They provide, they nurture, and they guide. Provide, nurture, and guide. You won't have to worry about the provide part. The entire culture will tell you as a man you have to provide. In fact, it's the only thing that the culture tells you. The only thing. The federal government has two programs. It's got to do fatherhood programs now over the last couple of years. But by and large, there are two programs for fatherhood. the child support system for guys who are not married to mom, and the tax code for guys who are. And we have defined fathering solely based on presence with a T as opposed to presence with a CE. So, what's the part that's going to be the most challenging for most guys? Which one do you think? Provide, nurture, guide. Which one do you think? Excuse me? Nurture and guide. Most guys, we want to provide and we want to guide without nurturing. Rules without relationship yield rebellion. So what's guiding? Connecting heart to heart with your children. Getting into the emotional well-being of your kids. Meeting them at their point of need. Well, how do you learn to do that? Get around some kids. I mean, seriously, it's not that complicated. You really just have to be intentional. Intentional. It really is. It's that simple. And then you start an exploration, much like I told this young lady here. You start looking for good fathers that you see. Talk to me about being a dad. What's it like? Talk to your own dad. You know, his history is linked to his death. What do you think about as a father? What kind of job do you think you're doing, Dad? What are the things that you would do differently with me? I want to be a good father. Help me on that path. Help me on that journey. Find other people that are good fathers. Truckloads of fatherhood books. Fathering is a skill-based activity. It's a skill-based activity. You can learn to shoot a better jump shot. You can learn to fix a car. You can learn to be a dad. It's codified out there. But most guys don't spend the time to be able to do that, and certainly in college. And women have an advantage here because women have periods. They do. And when a young girl has her first period, that says to her, you know what? There's a purpose behind this. I better get myself tightened up here. I could become a mother. And it starts the process. Men need to have periods. I'm just saying. I don't know, like a sympathy period or something. I don't know, but and that's part of what we've lost in our culture. We've lost these rite of passages. Because a period is really a rite of passage. You young ladies, right, when you had it in your mouth, oh, this is special. And you're like, oh, this is disgusting. But she's like, oh, it's so beautiful. She's crying and everything, right? We've lost those rites of passage. But that's a rite of passage. It starts moving a young girl down this path of motherhood. You get a little girl, we slap a dowel in her hand. I don't think boys are going to run on carrying dowels. We'll use them as weapons, as they should be. I'm not one of these kind of like, gender neutral, give a boy a dowel so boys will use them as hammers and stuff and run over them with their trucks. That's not the strategy, right? But you can start the process, and even as a dad, you start defining these things for your kids, right? So you say, I do this so that, son, my process, my desire for you, son, is that you be a really good father. So let me watch. When I do this for mom, see I'm doing these dishes? You know why I'm doing that? You know why? Because I love her and she's connected. I do this so that. I do this so that. It's just intentional. It really, it's just not. Now, I don't work for National Fatherhood Initiative anymore. I love the place, but you can go to fatherhood.org. There's all kinds of resources to help you build your skills. But the challenge and the problem is that most guys do not do it until they're in crisis mode. She's leaving me and she's taking the kids. How can I be a better father? Too late, right? Not really, but you get my point, right? So just be intentional. How many of you guys in here are men? How many of you guys who are men have the potential to be fathers? How many of you have done anything to prepare yourself for that? That's hands. How many of you young ladies in here have thought about your career in the context of what you need to do as a mother if you decide to be one? How many of you guys in here have thought about your career in the context of what you need to do as a father? It's better. This is a good room. Most rooms, I'm telling you, most guys go through college, hadn't thought 1 second how this career that I choose is going to impact my ability to be a father. So, again, this is probably, where's the researcher here? Probably got a bad sample here, but you asked us, right? Selection bias. But still, but you could see with women, there's more, they have to make that decision. It's on the top of mind. They start thinking about those things in a way guys don't. I'm sorry, it's a long answer to a very short question. Yes, in the red. Or wait. We'll have to hurry up. Yes.
My name is Mary Beth, and I'm from Franciscan University. But I'm originally from South Carolina, and our population is 65% African American. So like what you were talking about a lot about like seeing a lack of fathers. I've seen that a lot with my friends, like not growing up without dads. Particularly when I was working at Cracker Barrel, there was a woman who was pregnant, and she was with the guy that I worked there. But when I talked to her, I was like, "Are you thinking about maybe marrying him?" She looked at me like, "Are you nuts? Like, why would I marry him?" And I don't know, like, how do you respond to that? Because like then when I talked to him later, he was like, "Well, I have like 10 kids or something." He was joking about it. Like he goes, "I'm already a dad." He wasn't excited about being a dad, and like he thought about it as a joke. So like, what do you say to people like that who just like look at you like you're bonkers when you talk about marriage? Like, especially in that community, because I'm sure you know firsthand, because you talk about your family. Like, how do you respond to that without them like laughing at you?
Well, the conversation has to start. It has to start somewhere, and sometimes it starts with laughing at you. It's. I tell people, love requires truth. It just does. If you're going to love people, you're going to tell them the truth. Tolerance doesn't require truth, right? Tolerance is secular love. So it's love without truth. So you have to make a decision whether you're going to tolerate people, which I know here at Princeton, tolerance is the high idea that we all should aspire to. It's actually not a high idea. It's actually a lower idea. Love is a high idea. And the way you know that is like when my wife, I met her, and I said, listen, I want to be with you forever. And if I said to her, listen, the first time I saw you in that trash bag, I knew that I could tolerate you for the rest of my life. And that one day, I'm hopeful that we can have children that we together can tolerate for many, many years. And as we grow old, our tolerance will grow more and more and more and more. I know I'm not answering the question that you asked me, but I just give you that as a freebie because you hear that around here. Don't let people tell you that tolerance is a high idea. It's not. Love is a high idea. But if you love, it requires truth. You have to speak truth because if you don't, you're tolerating. Right? Hitler tolerated the Jews. First in the neighborhoods, then in the ghettos, then in the concentration camps, then in the ovens. Tolerance always has its limits. And tolerance has no mechanism to deal with people that they think don't love them or don't like them. There's no framework, but love does. Right? Anyway, I digress. But to your question, I really think part of it actually is asking questions. Asking questions. And you've got to start laying out those questions for those people and start engaging them in conversations. And part of the way that I do it is I get them focused on their kids. I really do. I find that's the on-ramp. That's the on-ramp. That's where you have to start the conversation. It's been so eroded in our culture, particularly in the African American culture, that you start to have the conversation. And you have to talk to her about the benefits of marriage. This is why, to your point here, the young lady asked, this is why you need to know. You say, well, listen, let me tell you why I think marriage is really important. The best societal glue to connect the father to your kid is if you're married to him in a high quality, low conflict marriage. That's just the reality of it. That's just the reality of it. And it sets a model for you. And was your father around? No, he wasn't. Did that hurt you? Yes, it did. Well, is that what you want to have for your own kids? You see, because so often we replicate what we hate. Unless somebody stops you, you're just going to continue down that path. You just replicate what you hate. So if you really have that discussion with her, you've got to help her. You've got to help her to do that. The thing that I gave you about participation equals motivation plus location. What kind of participation do you want the father to have with your kid? Well, okay, boom, boom, boom. It's just, you have to start one person at a time, and you have to have a healthy appreciation of the institution, and you have to be willing to kind of get yourself messy and get in there, because I really believe this. I really believe this. It's this I dream a dream thing. You say, well, when you were a little girl, what did you dream for yourself? was this what you dreamed for yourself? What did you dream? I'm confident that when she laid down with that guy, her dream was not that he was going to get her pregnant and take no responsibility. She just never asked the 20 questions. You know, you somewhere you have that conversation, and maybe you stop her from having, maybe she's got 2, but maybe you stop her from having 10. You stop her from, you see what I'm saying? You just have to share the truth. And the other thing I always do, particularly with single mothers, and this that kind of helps a bit, I think. I ask them this question. I say, they have other kids. I say, how much access does the father of your child, the mother of your child, let me say this right. How much access does the mother of the father of your child have to your child? Right? So it's the paternal grandmother, right? And most of the time they'll say, well, none. And then I say, well, how much access do you want to have to your grandkids? Well, I want to have a lot of access. Oh, crap. You have a vested interest then to make sure that that little boy that you're raising is not like his dad. Because if he is, you won't be seeing your grandkids either. So you have a vested interest in what? Helping him understand marriage. And I think the other thing, too, that I think people fall into this cycle, and I'll just give you this, it's the distinction between hypocrisy and growth. Right? So words mean a lot. Hypocrisy and growth. So what happens a lot of times is people will do something in their life, right? And then they'll feel like, I don't have the ability to tell someone else not to do that thing because I'm a hypocrite. So in my case, I got my girlfriend pregnant, right? So I had to have a conversation with my sons. I have 2 boys, both single. I'm just saying. Note to file. Anyway, and I'd be a fabulous father-in-law. Fabulous. Wouldn't you agree? Come on now, work with me. Anyway, so I have 2 sons, right? I have 2 sons, and the hardest conversation that I was going to have was with my oldest son, in particular, when he became of age, when I was going to have to talk to him about the stuff that y'all are talking about. I didn't want him to have sex before marriage and all that kind of stuff. I saw what happened to me. My father, by the way, was a teen father as well. This was 2 generations of this thing. And I was just like, this has to stop. And it was like a terrifying situation to talk to him, because the thought that was in my head was, well, he's going to think I'm a hypocrite, right? Because you're going to tell me to do something that you tell me not to do something that you did. That's not hypocrisy. That's called growth. Hypocrisy is if you tell someone to stop doing something that you're currently doing. So if you are smoking blunts and you tell your kids don't smoke blunts, you're a hypocrite. But if you once did that and you're no longer doing it, that's called growth. That's why kids have parents, so you can communicate that set of values. And so you've got to move her. You've also got to have that conversation with her to start trying to help her cast a different vision. And I really believe this firmly. The research that I've seen on African American women around marriage is really interesting. In that Mama Says study, when we surveyed moms, and we looked at them, we basically looked at them in terms of the satisfaction of the fathers of their kids. Black women were the most satisfied of the whole demographic of women. By a small margin, more satisfied than white women than the performance of the fathers of their children when they were married. The least satisfied demographic of all were women who were not married to the father and the father had children with someone else. That's also black women. It's also black women. So, you know, when you look at the data, what we also find is particularly lower income black women, it's kind of an interesting thing. They almost value marriage more than they should. It sounds crazy to say it, but it's an idealistic understanding of what it takes, what a marriage should be. So it's this notion that marriage is so unattainable. It has to be perfect. I mean, if we were going to be married, that means we wouldn't ever argue or we wouldn't have a fight. It's this idealistic sort of Cinderella, fairy tale-ish understanding of marriage because you've never seen it. You haven't been in a relationship where you've seen a husband and a wife, a father and a mother interact, love each other, have a conflict, and reconcile. So you end up with this idealistic understanding of what marriage is because you've never seen what a real marriage looks like. So that's the other thing too. So that's what some of the research I've seen with black women is that they value the institution of marriage even higher, but it's an unrealistic expectation. In other words, I mean, who could possibly get there? So you de-link marriage from fatherhood. But people who've had married parents, you go, no, they argue sometimes. They fight sometimes. Sometimes they don't like each other. That's what they do. And then they negotiate and they love each other. Oh, I get it. I'm learning how to do that. But you've never seen that. And the only thing you see is marriage on television or something like that, where if there is a happy marriage, there's no conflict, there's no fighting, there's no whatever, then you grow up with this whole notion of marriage being something that it absolutely is not. So it's all of those things together. And the folks who've been in situations, been raised by married parents, you've got to go back in and start helping people understand what this institution really looks like in that context and makes it more attainable. Again, long answer to a very short question. I hope that helped somewhat, but it's difficult. It's difficult. Anyway, that's it. Thanks so much.